Right. Let's try this again. I'm really bad at streaming. I managed to do a whole stream without checking it was actually transmitting. So, I'm going to show you a feature I've been working on for OpenBrush. It's based on the work Tim Adley did on having user-editable brushes. Now, his stuff really laid the groundwork for this, but it was all... you had to edit text files to customize brushes, and it was hard to persuade people to test it out. So I've been working on a UI for it and the ability to edit brushes at runtime. So hopefully it'll be a bit more accessible to people. There's still a lot that's broken. There's still a lot of stuff not really working properly, but it's all wired up and essentially functional. You just have to work around the kind of bugs and limitations a bit. I did a demo of this a couple of weeks ago, which showed it kind of working, but that was mostly smoke and mirrors. It wasn't really saving anything in the background. So it's been quite a lot of effort to get it from that state to this state. So there's the new button on the experimental panel to edit the brush. And it pops up with a settings panel with all the different properties that the brush exposes, or at least I've only covered the properties for the material so far. There's a bunch of other properties I could expose, but that's going to have to happen later. If you choose a normal built-in brush or an experimental brush, basically any brush that's not user editable, instead of settings, you'll see just the preview stroke and a big plus button that says copy this brush as a new user brush. If I click that, there'll be a little pause, which I should optimize out. And then it'll load that. It'll make a copy of that brush as a user editable brush. And it actually copies all the textures over now as well. It didn't. Tim's code didn't do that, but I save off the textures that the brush uses so that you can just jump into, Photoshop or whatever image editor you use and tweak them. So here we go. This is now a copy of the dots brush, exactly the same as before, except it's now user editable. So I can go in, I can pick a completely different texture. And change some settings. Let's put it on the faintest. There we go. So that's kind of nice. Did you notice then when I let go, it reverted back to the original brush? That's because I haven't saved yet. So if I click save now, it'll write my changes to the brush file and update any strokes I've already painted. And now that's a perfectly working user editable brush that I can zip up that folder and send it to people. If they open sketches I made with it, as long as they've got the brushes, it'll work. It'll be there in the future. And you can carry on tweaking it. You can see all the brushes of this little document icon are user editable. Ones that I've copied in the past. There's some fun ones in here. Here's a copy of the experimental brush called Muscle. And I've tweaked the textures to make it slightly disgusting. It's now a creepy worm brush. Let's try that with a different colour. Let's give it a yucky greeny brown. There you go. I'm sure some of you will find uses for a slug brush. But all I did here was I took the existing muscle brush, I turned up the shininess. I added a tint to the specular colour, so you can see it's got kind of coloured highlights that don't match the base colour. And you can change that to whatever colour you want. And then I swapped out the textures. So I'm using this texture for the diffuse color, the main texture, and I'm using, in fact you can't really see it, I'm using a kind of stripy ridged, stripy bump map. And you end up with worms. Whee! Now, if I can just animate those, you'll have something truly repulsive. So at the moment, we're limited by what parameters the brushes expose, and some don't. Some of the brushes don't really expose any parameters, so I'm going to try and see how much I can tweak the underlying shaders to be a bit more flexible. But it's quite fun just going through the brushes, swapping out textures from other brushes and seeing what happens. I don't know if I already said this, but the texture list here that you're seeing is taken from 3 places. It's the textures from all the existing brushes that are built in. And you can say I've accidentally included a few of the icons. I should find a way to exclude those. But yeah, all the existing brush texture maps and bump maps and whatnot. Any files you've put into your media library in your user folder or in other brushes. And of course, any of the textures you've added to this brush will show up in this list. And when you pick a texture, it creates a copy of that texture. It copies the texture from wherever it currently lives, either baked into Unity or in another folder, and it creates a copy inside the brush folder. So it's safe to then go in and edit those. Each brush ends up with its own unique copy of any of the textures it uses. The downside of that is you kind of end up with a lot of clutter in your brush folder, because every time you try a texture, you end up with a copy of it. I'll have to think about the best way of handling that. Clean up unused textures button, maybe, because otherwise this list will just be full of duplicates after a while. There's lots of little rough edges and things like that I've got to have a think about. But as you can see, it kind of works. These are custom brushes that I've just made in VR, in the app, on the fly, and they're permanently part of my brush library after that. I'll try and do some more videos showing more tricks and features and as it evolves. But yeah, that's the